Hi students, in this video we're going to talk about using AJAX to get information from your Razor view back to your controller and then look up items that way. So what we'll do is we're going to, if you remember from the last video, we called our basic action to get our items from our database. And then once we had those items, they showed up as links in our view to another action, and that action was called type. So I have that type action here, and that would synchronously go out, get the item type, do something with it, and return a type view. So it would go out, make a post back to the server, and return a different view. But maybe that's not always the route you want to go. Maybe you don't want the user to have to change the view they're on. Maybe you want the view to stay the same and just load some more information for the user. Maybe it's supplemental information that you don't want to go through an entire post back for the user to view. So in this particular scenario, what I want to do is I want to click on one of those anchors here. So I want to click on one of these item types, and I want to go and make a server post back. And I want the server to go and figure out what items are associated with that type and return it to my view asynchronously. So without the view going away or anything like that, I want to do it via JavaScript. So what I can do is I'm going to use a pattern called AJAX, which stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. AJAX, Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Now, unfortunately, this definition didn't hold too well since XML isn't always the way to do it. Sometimes it's returned with JSON, which is actually what I'll be doing here. So if we remember, whenever we wanted to put JavaScript in our view, we needed to put it inside of a section in our layout. So if you remember, in our layout, we had this render section for scripts, for our JavaScripts. And it's not required for every view, it's just optional. So I'm going to come back, I'm going to close this since we're not working with it. Close this, and I'm going to say at scripts, or at section, sorry, section, and the section's name will be scripts, and I'm on to have an open curly brace. So this script should correlate to the scripts that's in the layout, and it's going to say, okay, I need to include these in the layout. So from there, I'm going to make a script section where I can say text equals text/JavaScript, so I can tell it that this section is going to include JavaScript. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and make a document.ready. So whenever the document is ready, load this JavaScript. And the JavaScript that I'm going to load will be inside of my function event. So when the document is ready, go ahead and fire this, essentially this anonymous method that will then run all of my functions. So within that, what I want to, whenever somebody clicks on one of these, I want to asynchronously go to my controller and find out what they clicked on and return back those items. So the first thing that I actually need to do is I need to change these from, instead of anchors with controller actions, I'm going to go ahead and comment these out. And I'll make a div again. And instead I'll have an anchor that has a class on it. That way I can go ahead and get that click event on that class. I'll say item type, class equals item type. And the href, I'll go ahead and put an href on it of nothing. That way it shows up as something that can be clicked on. I'll go ahead and give it an optional ID of @item.id. and I'll say at item.name. Okay, so now I have an anchor I can click on with the class of item type. So now I can grab that class down here in my AJAX function. So I can go ahead and make a JavaScript event. And I'm going to say whenever the class, and I'm going to denote with the period, item type is clicked. So jQuery.click. I'll go ahead and set another anonymous function to fire whenever that happens. So now whenever somebody clicks on an item type, I want this to occur. So the first thing I want to do is load in the event that occurs inside of my function. And I want to do event.preVentDefault. So what that does is I want it to not do this href action. Instead, I want you to do my AJAX function. So what I want to do is I want to say, first I want to get the ID from the event. So I want to say is the event.target.id, which will then get the ID of the element they clicked on. So they clicked on this class item type, but there's about 10 of these item types. So I want to get the specific ID from that item type. Okay, so that's what will be held in this ID. And then I want to reach out via AJAX to go back to my controller action. So what we can do is use jQuery.ajax, go ahead and open up our AJAX function. And inside of our AJAX function, the type I want is our HTTP type. So I'm going to say get. So I want this to be a get request. The URL I want it to use is the URL inside of our controller. So I'm going to say /type. So so go to /items/type. The data type that I'll be sending information back to my controller, I'm going to say is JSON. The data that I'm going to send back to my controller in JSON format will be ID, and I'm going to pass back the ID that I just got in my JavaScript function. And I'm going to say on success, so when you successfully call the controller, I want to go ahead and call another function called success. And in that success function, I want to send the data back that the controller gives me. Okay, so now we have all of that. So let's go ahead and make that success function. I want to do that here. So inside of my document.ready still, I'm going to go ahead and say function success that's going to take in the data. I'm going to say, so first we need a place to put the results. So I'm going to go ahead and make another HTML element down here. That's just a division with an ID of results. Okay, so now we have that. So here I want to grab that element. So I'm going to say var result equals document. So this element or this page that I'm on, .get element by ID, and that ID is results. And the next thing I'll do is I'll go through a jQuery each loop. So for each result that I have in my Java or in my JSON, that I'm going to call data, and then I'm going to increment through those with an index and the particular element that I want inside of the index. And then I'll say result, which is the element that I'm on, dot append. So I want to add in an HTML element inside of my div. I want to add in a paragraph element with the data, name, plus a closing p tag. Okay. So let's see. I have /type. I'm setting it an ID. Let's go back to my controller and make sure everything is kosher there. I'm not using this at the moment, so I want to get rid of that. What does this want? Okay. So remember, if we remember my AJAX function, this was actually a get. So I'm going to say HTTP get. And then I'm going to go ahead and make a route attribute just so my AJAX knows exactly where to go verbatim. So I'm going to say the route is type with, I don't call it item ID, I just call it ID. Okay, so what I'm going to do is return, instead of a view, I'm not going to return a view. This is asynchronous. I'm going to return just JSON. And that JSON is going to reach out to my repository dot get all items associated. Okay, and then dot where, and I only want to return the items where the item type ID equals the ID that's being sent here. Let's actually not use the dot equals. Okay, what it doesn't like about this is a string because it's JSON, and this is an integer, so I actually want to cast this convert.toInt32 ID. So now I'm comparing integers to integers. All right, now let's go ahead and see if that all works. So let's click Show Basic Diablo 2 Items, which we have our new anchor tags here that should have our class on it. So if we inspect, you should see the class of item type. So let's go ahead and click Network, and it should show us what happens if anything goes wrong. So I'm not guaranteeing this will work first try. A lot of the stuff you do in JavaScript doesn't. It's just trial and error. Now let's click Sword. All right, so you see the request that went out. Okay, and you can see that it got all of the swords. Okay, so it looks like it worked. So if you go to your network tab, it'll show you what happened. So you can see that it went out. Here's what happened. It did a GET request where the type was ID of 1. So you see it went and did this query string variable, ID equal to 1. So it went to the type route, which I called in my controller. I called it type, and then it passed in ID of 1, and then it returned back to us all of the items where the item type ID was the item that I passed back here. So we can see if I change out another one, so let's say What other ones did I put in here? I think I put some axes in here. Let's put axe. All right, so what happened there? All right, and we see that it went out and we got hand axe, axe, double axe. So every time I click something, it should go out and get more of them. I think I put a few bows in here. Looks like it's taken a second, but then it goes out and gets short bow and hunter's bow. So I might need to fix something where I get rid of the old ones every time something is clicked. Maybe I might want to put this in some sort of HTML table, maybe associate some images with it and whatnot. But you can see a couple different ways that I can make postbacks. I can make a postback using, I can make postbacks to web pages and reload the entire web page, or I can use AJAX to make a post back to my controller and then maybe just return a little bit of data and put in a place for it in my HTML view. So that's just a couple different ways to use our Razor views to put in data into it using both AJAX as well as postbacks entirely and return new pages. So I hope this helps. I hope you experiment with AJAX in your views to show exactly how you use it to go back to your controller asynchronously. So I hope this was a good overview on Razor syntax and Razor views, and I'll see you guys in the next video.